Persuasion. Cold politeness. In this video talk, I'm going to look at a short passage from Jane Austen's final novel, Persuasion, in the course of which I want to consider closely Jane Austen's use of the phrase cold politeness, as well as two other similar phrases. The passage comes fairly early on in the novel, at the end of chapter 8 in volume 1. The hero of the novel, Captain Wentworth, recently returned to England after service in the Royal Navy overseas. Captain Wentworth is the centre of attention in a social gathering in the family home of the Musgroves, where he's been impressing everyone with his tales of adventures in the Navy, and where, after dinner, he's been dancing in turn with the two Musgrove daughters, Henrietta and Louisa, both of whom are already smitten with the handsome and dashing naval officer. The music for the dancing is being played on the piano by Anne Elliot, the heroine of the novel. Playing the piano instead of dancing is now her normal practice, and this has symbolic importance, as to refrain from dancing is to withdraw from the area where courtship is so often conducted in Jane Austen's novels. For Anne to be regularly stationed at the piano instead of dancing marks her out clearly as a celibate female figure. At this point, I need to supply some background for those who aren't familiar with the novel. Over 7 years before, Anne and Captain Wentworth were deeply in love and on the verge of marriage until she allowed herself, very reluctantly, to be persuaded to turn him down as a prospective husband. Anne believed at the time that she was acting for the best for both of them, and especially and unselfishly so for the captain's benefit. Acting for the best by rejecting him at an early stage in his career when he had no prospects of setting up a comfortable and successful married life. The captain, however, didn't see it this way at all, departing from her with a bitter sense of being ill-used. Now, just short of 8 years later, he's thinking of marriage again, but not with Anne, as he believes his love for her has died. Anne, though, is still quietly and sorrowfully attached to him. I'll now read you the passage I've chosen in which events are experienced through Anne's consciousness. The passage begins with Anne, her fingers busily occupied in playing music for the others to dance to, but her mind aware of Captain Wentworth's presence in the room. Once, she knew that he must have spoken of her. She was hardly aware of it till she heard the answer, but then she was sure of his having asked his partner whether Miss Elliot never danced. The answer was, "Oh no, never. She's quite given up dancing. She'd rather play. She's never tired of playing." Once, too, he had spoken to her. She had left the piano on the dancing being over, and he had sat down to try to make out an air, play a melody by ear, make out an air which he wished to give the Miss Musgroves an idea of. Unintentionally, Anne returned to that part of the room. He saw her, and instantly rising, said with studied politeness, "I beg your pardon, madam. This is your seat." And though she immediately drew back with a decided negative, he was not to be induced to sit down again. Anne did not wish for more of such looks and speeches. His cold politeness, his ceremonious grace were worse than anything. Chapter ends strikingly at this point. This reading, I hope you picked up the phrase that I use as the title or guiding theme of my talk, and perhaps the two other phrases that go along with it. The title phrase was, of course, cold politeness, which echoes the phrase studied politeness from a few lines earlier. And this is followed by a phrase of similar meaning to the previous two, namely ceremonious grace. Consider what these three phrases have in common. In form, each consists of two words, an adjective followed by a noun. In the first two, the noun is identical, politeness. And in the third phrase, the noun, in the context in which it's used, is a close synonym for politeness, namely grace. Both politeness and grace here express the sense of good manners, courteous behaviour. Surely a desirable thing in any civilized social context. Yet, each time these nouns are used, they are qualified, which in grammatical terminology means being given a particular defining quality. The nouns are qualified by an adjective that has an undermining effect on them. In the title phrase of my talk, cold actually negates the favourable sense of politeness by saying that the politeness lacks the warmth of kindness or affection that should properly go along with it. So that the idea of politeness is contradicted, almost becoming the complete opposite of good manners and courteous behaviour. Cold politeness, therefore, could be seen as an oxymoron, or at least a semi-oxymoron. Something similar is at work in the earlier phrase, studied politeness, and the later one, ceremonious grace. In each of these, the adjectives studied and ceremonious convey a sense of over-deliberateness, of contrivance. The supposed politeness and grace have an empty artificiality because they do not come from the heart. True politeness should be designed to put someone at ease, making the recipient of the polite remark or gesture feel happy and comfortable. But this is actually the reverse of what happens in this passage. And Captain Wentworth's failure to make Anne happy and comfortable at this point is made even worse by the fact that he's just asked one of the Musgrove girls if Anne never dances, and has been told that Anne has completely given up dancing in favour of playing the piano. Unlike the unnamed Musgrove girl who makes this comment about Anne very blithely and innocently, with no real knowledge or understanding of Anne's state of mind and feelings, Captain Wentworth is perfectly able to grasp what Anne's withdrawal from dancing must mean. Namely, that Anne, in the years after breaking off her romance with him, is a woman bereft of romantic love, a woman left on the shelf, who deserves his kindness and compassion. To speak to Anne with cold politeness, especially after conducting himself so freely and warmly with other people in the social gathering, in full view of her. To speak to her in this way is to lack sensitivity to another person's feelings, especially someone who once meant so much to him. To lack sensitivity to a marked degree. Jane Austen is a masterly writer about human relationships, partly because of her ability to see below the surface appearance of things. To the ordinary observer, the encounter between Anne and Captain Wentworth at the piano might seem a perfect example of gentlemanly behaviour by the captain. After all, he's politely addressing her as Madam, while courteously begging her pardon for taking her customary seat. But of course, the reality is that his politeness is designed to push his former beloved away. The woman whom Captain Wentworth would once have lovingly called Anne is now kept at a manageable distance from him by being addressed with the formal title Madam, which he might use to a complete stranger. The episode is abruptly brought to a close with two terse sentences showing that Wentworth has, as it were, dropped Anne with a thud into her solitary, suffering self. And I'll quote these final two sentences once again to bring my talk to an end. Anne did not wish for more of such looks and speeches. His cold politeness, his ceremonious grace were worse than anything. Thank you for listening.